Hello, this is Joe. Welcome back to the channel. Well, I've done typewriter comparisons quite a bit on this channel. In fact, our last video, I was comparing electric type bar machines, and that was a fun video for me to do. But today, we have a matchup between my two large standard manual typewriters. On your left is the Olympia SG1, on your right is the Royal KMM. These two are some of my favorite typewriters of all time. The SG1 is newer to my collection. I got it from a local owner. It has not been professionally serviced, but it's in pretty good shape, and I've done some cleaning and degreasing to it. And on your right, the Royal KMM, this was purchased from John Lewis's shop a few years ago, professionally serviced. So I think it's fun to consider standard typewriters because you don't have a lot of room for standard typewriters, at least the usual collector, because portable typewriters have cases. You can put them in the case, you can store them, you can stack them, you can put them in closets, under the bed, on shelves or whatever. But these standard typewriters didn't come with storage cases. They came shipped from the factory in crates, typically. But because they don't have storage cases to protect them, if you want to store them, you really have a problem doing that. So typically they end up sitting out on a desk and taking space up. So that's one of the reasons why standard typewriters, typically the usual collector has less of them in the collection because they take up more room. You only have a limited amount of table space. Certainly I have a limited amount of table space. I have two desks off to your right. The KMM shares the desk with the Selectric 721, and the SG1 has its own desk over there. So both of these machines are very cool, wonderful, big, robust, professional typists' manual typewriters. And I thought it would be great to consider, how do they match up? How do they fare in terms of professional typists, features, the speed, the usability? We're going to have some fun looking at these two wonderful typewriters. Well, let's start on the left side of the SG1 Carriage. So, of course, we have the massive carriage return lever, which is a wonderful lever to use. The paper bale has its own little plastic handles. You could pull the paper bale forward, which is really nice, and you can, of course, also flip the bale up. So on the top of the left carriage is the dial for the line spacing selector. So it goes 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 line spacing. And it has these little painted arrows for 1, 2, and 3. The whole line spacing is indicated there. So the carriage release lever is right here. The platen knob, and if you pull out the rim of the platen knob like that, it will permanently change the line spacing. Whereas up here you have a temporary line spacing disconnect, your infinite variable, and when you set it back, it'll return to the same line spacing. One of the things that's unique about the SG1 compared to the KMM is it has an all clear lever for the tabs. So going like that will clear all the tabs. There's also another lever on the other side that does that. So one of the things I really like about the SG1's paper bale is it has this serrated metal roller, very much like an Olivetti Studio 44, and also the paper bale is articulated so that both rollers will always touch the platen. So a lot of other kinds of typewriters, the angle of the support arms for the paper bale is fixed, and if they're a little crooked, one of them may not be touching the platen. But on this case, it floats so that it always touches the platen, so it's always in contact with it. So here's your erasing table, the big erasing table here, and you have your paper guide right here, and you have a nice set of push and slide margin settings that are very much visible from the front of the machine. All right, the Royal KMM left carriage. So carriage return lever is not nearly as long on the KMM, but I like the vertical rise of the handle here. It's sort of, you can kind of karate chop it to do a return, whereas the SG1's kind of curves downward. So the line spacing selector is this knob right here, and it goes 1, 2, and 3 whole line increments. So that's one of the big differences. The KMM does not have half line spacing. This knob right here, this button, is the left-hand carriage release button. And you might notice over here, when you move the carriage to the left, it will advance the ribbon. This lever right here is the temporary disconnect for the line spacing, whereas the button in the middle of the handle is the permanent disconnect or permanent change to the line spacing. The paper bail on the KMM is very strong. It has a strong set of springs, and the paper bail pulls forward and or also flips up. KMM, the reason why it's called KMM is it is key set tabulator and magic margin. So this was Royal's first full-size typewriter with the magic margin feature. And the way it works is, in this case, the left margin, you pull it forward, position the carriage wherever you want, and then pull it back, and that sets the margin at that point. Now, the problem with the magic margin is there's no margin indicator. You can't see where the margin has been set to just by looking at the machine. So what a lot of people ended up doing was using the paper bails rollers. You would slide the paper bail like so the left side of the roller was even with the left margin. Then you could use the paper bail as kind of a de facto or ad hoc margin indicator. So you do have a paper guide up here and a short scale right there. And there's of course a scale also on the paper bail itself. So underneath both the left and the right sides of the carriage on the body are these two knobs, and they turn 90 degrees like that. When they're vertical, it unlocks the carriage from the machine, from the chassis. So if you turn both of these knobs to the vertical position, you can lift the carriage right off of the machine. Okay, looking at the front of the carriage, in the middle of the carriage on the SG1, of course the paper bail right here. There is a mark at the 55 point, which is the halfway midpoint of the paper scale. And one of the things that's really noticeable about the SG1 are the card guides. Large plastic card guides that hinge out. They're spring-loaded, so they push back against the carriage. And they have the holes for putting a pen or pencil in for drawing lines. A nice big metal chrome-plated card guide wire right here. So the typewriter takes the DIN-sized European spools. The ribbon is threaded in the conventional way, on the left side going behind the spool, through the reversing guide, through the ribbon vibrator to the right side. And it has these spring-loaded levers that keeps the ribbon pack nice and tight, so it gives some degree of back tension to the ribbon. So I mentioned that the card guides are spring-loaded, and there are these two locking levers. If you slide them to the middle of the machine, that will lock the card guides so they can't flip out very far. But if you pull them out toward the edge of the machine, then it enables them to be moved much further out. I like to leave them in the loose position so that you don't accidentally break the card guide if you bump it too hard. Okay, on the KMM, the paper bail has a scale on it. It has two rubber rollers that'll slide, but the springs are very heavy on the paper bail, and the joints here on the ends are not articulated like they are with the SG1 or Olivetti Studio 44s. But in this particular machine, both rollers roll just about the same when you engage them like that. There are card guides, actually you push them up like that. They're spring-loaded, they lock into place, and that's the card guide. You can put cards behind them. And then if you push the little levers like that, it will lower them. So there's a little printing scale on either side there, but they really don't have a hole or a notch for drawing a line with a pen or pencil. But the ribbon cover pops back. It's hinged like that. Here you can see a better shot inside of it. And of course, because these are Royals, first of all, the spools have their own reversing mechanism on the bottom of the spool, so you have to use these kind of original spools with a reversing lever built into the bottom. And then the way that the ribbon threads on the spool is the opposite direction. The ribbon comes off the front of the spool heading toward the vibrator on both directions like that. These original metal spools have little finger holes, and there is a lever down here on the machine on the front lower left of your picture. If you push that lever like that, it'll disconnect the ribbon drive, and you can manually turn the ribbon by putting your finger in one of these little dimple holes. And that's a good way to manually wind the ribbon up to the end of the spool if you want to replace the ribbon, for instance. And then you release that, and it goes back to the original ratcheted position. And of course, when you move the carriage to the left, it does drive the ribbon. Okay, the right side of the SG1 carriage. So one of the most notable features of the SG1 and the SG3 is the paper injector lever. It reminds me of a Hurst shifter in an American muscle car from the late 1960s. So it has this dial here, and you can tell it how many lines to inject the paper. So let's just put a piece of paper in here, shall we? And pull the lever. And it feeds the paper up to whatever line setting you had there. This lever in front of it is the paper release, and you also might notice that when you pull the paper release forward, it will lift the paper bale. So it means you can easily pull the paper out. Really nice feature. I like that a lot. So further back on the carriage, you have the carriage release lever and another all-tab clear lever on the right side. And the margin setting up here on the right side of the carriage is a classic push and slide with an indicator, a red indicator on the scale. Very nice and easy to use. I really think these style margin indicators are just better, intrinsically better than the magic margin style. And of course we know that the Hermes 3000 borrowed the magic margin idea, but they instituted a very complicated, over-engineered red ribbon indicator in the paper bale to try to compensate for the fact that the Royal magic margin didn't have an indicator system at all. Okay, the right side of the KMM's carriage. Paper bale again, very strong spring. This metal roller for the paper bale runs along this metal track right here. And so when you pull the paper bale forward, you can see it running right there. The carriage release lever is inboard of the carriage knob. This is the paper release lever, and when you pull the paper release, the paper bale does not raise on its own. And the right hand magic margin. So there is a scale right here on the bottom front of the carriage. The top part of the scale goes from 0 to, in this case, 105 or whatever. But then the bottom scale is used for centering titles or centering text. So on the right side of the body of the KMM, there is a touch control. It has a dial indicator, and you turn the knob clockwise to increase the touch or increase the tension. And it goes from 0 up to 6. And I like to use it at a lower setting. I've been happy with it down near 0. And you can see this panel that pops loose from the inside. This is a residual styling effect that goes all the way back to the Royal 10, where that had the glass windows. Being standard typewriters, they both have larger diameter platens. On the KMM, the platen diameter is 37.5 millimeters, whereas on the SG1, the platen diameter is 44.2 millimeters. That's a nice fat platen. It would work pretty good for stiff cardstock and postcards, for instance. And now, I have a bulletin just in handed to me. If you like this program, please like and subscribe. I don't know what that means. Okay, let's look at the keyboard and controls of both machines, starting with the KMM here. So on the upper left, I should open up this ribbon cover. Upper left, we have the little lever for disengaging the ribbon drive, and then you can manually spin the ribbon by hand to advance it or thread it all the way to one side or the other. And then this lever is the manual reversing. If you want to manually reverse the ribbon itself, it's right there. And then on the right side, you have your bichrome setting. So the middle position is the top of the ribbon marked with blue. This is the bottom of the ribbon are red, and then your stencil position is locked until you push this little lever to the left, and then you can get to the stencil position. Tab set on the right side, tab clear on the left. The tabulator key is right here below the tab set. Your backspace key is the square one on the upper left side of the keyboard. Shift and shift lock, and this is one of the things I really love about the KMM keyboard, is the shift lock is not close to the A key. It's elevated up almost to the same height as the QWERTY row in such a way that it doesn't really obstruct my use of the letter A. So I don't have that interference between the A and the shift lock, which is really nice. And also, the shift lock can be cleared with either the left or the right shift key. This is a half space machine, like that, which is nice to have. Standard American keyboard, margin release on the right side. Okay, the Olympia keyboard, starting on the left, this is your bichrome setting. This machine actually, you could call it a trichrome. The blue setting is the top of the ribbon, the red setting is the bottom, the yellow setting is the middle of the ribbon, similar to the way the Hermes 3000 has, and then the white setting, of course, is your stencil. And you can just rotate this knob through in either direction to get back to any of those settings, which is nice. On the right side is the touch control, a rotary knob that goes 1 through 8. Goes through 1 through 8. I currently have it on 2. Your tabulator bar in the middle up here, similar to a 6 Series Smith Corona manual. The set and the clear are either side of it, very straightforward. So your shift lock can be cleared with either shift key. You'll notice the shift lock key, though, is quite a bit closer to the A key and at the same level of it, so I find there's a little bit more interference with my pinky striking the A key with the shift lock. So not quite as nice as on the KMM. Margin release is on the left, backspace is on the right. This is a half character space machine as well as a half line machine. And then I also have to mention the other notable feature on these SG1s is the double character spacing. So when you push that down, every time you press a space bar or a key, it'll add an extra space between the characters or the spacings. And then you release it like that to go back to the single character space mode. Well, features are one thing, but sometimes statistics don't tell the whole story. For instance, the SG1 weighs 38.2 pounds or 17.3 kilograms, where the KMM is 27.8 pounds or 12.6 kilograms, but the SG1 feels a lot heavier than the difference might suggest. So despite the difference in size and weight, the SG1 has an advantage over the KMM in that the carriage comes off so easily. And these machines were shipped when they were new with the carriage off of the chassis. They came in two separate pieces. And if you are shipping an SG1 or an SG3 across country, that's the way to do it. You pack them both separately. That way, the carriage can't move and destroy or damage the escapement, for instance. That's one of the great things about this machine. Despite its enormous size and weight, it actually ships safer in that sense than a typewriter like this, where it's not easy to take the carriage off, and you have to immobilize the carriage and permanently disconnect, like with a tie wrap or something, tape, the carriage release so you can disconnect the rack gear from the pinion of the escapement. But I do notice that the KMM, when I first bought it, in fact, the reason why I bought the KMM is because it types so well. When I test typed it at John Lewis's showroom, I noticed I could touch type on it with great ease, and I've felt that way ever since. It's really the best typing manual typewriter in my collection, I think. And it has to do with the keyboard layout. And one of the key features is the shift lock key. Instead of being right adjacent to the letter A, it is raised up almost to the QWERTY row above it in such a way that when I'm typing the letter A with my left pinky finger, I'm not hitting the shift lock like I often do with more other typewriters. And I don't hit it too often on the SG1, but the shift lock on the SG1 is close to the A key, and it's at the same height. I was also interested in, are there other keyboard differences between the two machines? So the first thing I wanted to do is measure the key spacing. And what you kind of need to do is measure from the center of one key to the center of the key on the other end of the row, and then divide by how many keys and figure out what the spacing is. But it's hard to know where the exact center of the key is, especially these trapezoidal shaped keys here. So what I did is I measured from, for instance, the right edge of the rim to the right edge of the rim on the key on the opposite side of the row, and then divide by how many spaces are between each key. And that gives you a really accurate way of measuring the separation between the keys from center to center. And I did that with all 4 rows on both machines. And it turns out the key spacing on these two machines are almost identical. 18.95 millimeters from center to center on the KMM versus 18.93 on the SG1. So measuring all the keys, all 4 rows, compensates for differences like individual key levers might be bent slightly one way or the other. It averages that out. So the key spacing is the same on both machines. So that doesn't really explain to me the difference in the way they feel. So the first thing I did is I wanted to measure the height. How much height difference is there between the bottom row and the back row? And so I used a pair of calipers, and I measured from the top edge of the rims of the key down to the table on the 4 corner keys, the 2 on the bottom row and the 2 on the top row, and then took the difference between them. So the KMM is 33.46 millimeters higher on the back row than the front row, and the SG1 is 33.24. It's almost the same height of the tiering, right? So again, they're very, very similar. So now we have to figure out, well, what about the spacing of the tiers? How steep are the tiering based on how far apart the bottom row from the back row is? This is where we see the difference. So with the KMM, basically what I'm doing is I'm measuring from the front rim of the bottom key to the front rim of the top key in the back. And I'm doing that on these 2 and on these 2 over here. So the KMM is 68.28 millimeters. You can think of it like a triangle, and we're measuring the hypotenuse. So it's 68.3 almost millimeters, and the SG1 is 65.15. So here's the difference. The SG1 has steeper tiering because the rows of keys are closer together. So it stacks up steeper. So the KMM is more gentle tiering, not as steep, and maybe that explains in part why, for my hands at least, I find the KMM to be an easier machine to type on. So another aspect of the ease of typing, the difference between the two machines, would be how long of a stroke are the keystrokes on both machines? How deep do the keys go from rest position to the maximum depth? And I, again, used calipers. I measured multiple keys on both machines, and it turns out that the KMM is 15.7 millimeters of a keystroke. The SG1 is 17.2. So the SG1 has 2 millimeter deeper keystroke than the KMM, but also the force required on the SG1 is a little harder. Even at its lowest setting, the SG1 has a heavier keystroke than on the KMM. So, in summary, the rows of keys are tiered more steeply on the SG1. The keystroke is deeper on the SG1, and the force required is heavier. And I think those 3 things, along with the shift lock being a little closer to the A key, means that the SG1 is not quite as fast for me to type on than the KMM. So besides the ease of typing and the speed of typing on the KMM, there are other differences between these two machines that might make one more useful than the other. It depends on your preferences. So first of all, the KMM has magic margins, which are easy to set. Just pull a lever forward, move the carriage to where the margin should be, push the lever back. But the disadvantage is you can't see where the margins are at visibly just by looking at the machine. Whereas on the SG1, like most other typewriters, you have to push and slide the margin controls, but you can see where the margins are set much easier. So the KMM only has 1, 2, or 3 whole line spacing, whereas the SG1 has half line spacing. So you have those intermediate 1.5 and 2.5 line spacings, which is really nice. The SG1 has the paper injector with the adjustable setting for how far it injects the paper. That's a feature that, of course, these Royals didn't have. The SG1 has what I call the trichrome setting, or it has the middle position of the ribbon, whereas the KMM only has the upper and lower halves of the ribbon for the bichrome. The SG1 has the full tab clear levers on both left and right side of the carriage. Quite convenient. Both machines have half character spacing, but the SG1 has the double spacing key, so you can start spacing out words like when you're making a title or a header or whatever. And the SG1 has the very convenient and handy plastic card guides, nice and big and wide, and spring-loaded so they're durable, and they have the holes for drawing lines for making tables. And of course, the removable carriage on the SG1 is another feature entirely. So two entirely different machines. The design of the KMM, its heritage goes all the way back to the Royal 10 of the 1920s and teens, I guess, where the SG1 is a newer design and had more features intrinsically, but it's a bigger machine. So it's difficult for me to choose one over the other or to recommend only one of these. I think if you have the room and the inclination to have two large standard manual typewriters, it's hard to go wrong with both of these. And I would definitely recommend them in your collection. And you might ask yourself, why would I want two large standard manual typewriters? One alone should be sufficient for any writing job I might have. And that is very true. Both of these were meant for professional typists, for serious professional work. That is true. But I find the typing experience on both of these to be different enough that sometimes it helps our creativity as writers if we can switch back and forth between several different writing experiences. It sometimes unlocks a new avenue of creativity in our minds. And that's one good reason to have several nice standard typewriters on your desk. And I certainly recommend a Royal of this kind, the KMM or later, and an SG1 or SG3. Both of these are great typewriters, and I highly recommend them both. And as always, stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.